Michael spent years plotting to take down his black boss, Cherry Johnson, believing he could outsmart him. But when he broke into Cherry's office to find a secret, he didn't realize Cherry had been watching him all along. What happened next will shatter everything Michael believed about power, race, and ambition. But let's start from the beginning. Michael had never imagined he'd find himself in this position. He had always considered himself a smart, hard-working guy. He was the type who kept his head down, put in his hours, and did his job well enough to get by. But there was always a gnawing feeling in the back of his mind that he wasn't getting what he deserved. As a white man working in sales at a large, high-powered corporation, Michael had climbed just high enough to get a glimpse of the power that others held, but never quite high enough to grasp it for himself. And then there was Cherry Johnson, his boss. Cherry, a black man, had steadily risen through the ranks of the company, while Michael felt like he was stuck at the same level, despite his own efforts. From the moment Michael had joined the team, he couldn't shake the feeling that Cherry's success wasn't just due to skill or hard work. He didn't believe Cherry had earned it the same way he had. No, Michael was certain Cherry's rise had something to do with secrets, something hidden beneath the surface. And those secrets, Michael believed, were the key to breaking through. Cherry had been nothing but kind to Michael in the past, always offering advice, a pat on the back, or a word of encouragement. But it wasn't enough. Michael needed more. He wanted recognition, promotions, the kind of power Cherry had. And in Michael's mind, Cherry's success wasn't just about being good at his job. It was about playing the game better than everyone else, and using things that Michael couldn't even begin to understand. The thought that he, a white man, might always be just slightly overlooked in favor of someone like Cherry made his skin crawl. He couldn't let it continue. So, he began to watch. He watched for weaknesses, for any signs of foul play. He began snooping around, asking questions when people weren't paying attention, and doing everything he could to figure out how Cherry had gotten to the top. The more Michael dug, the more convinced he became that there was something dirty, something that could be exposed, that would allow him to take the top spot. When he finally got his hands on the keycards to Cherry's office, Michael felt like he was on the brink of something huge. The opportunity had come at the right time. Cherry had a meeting that day, a meeting that would take him out of the office for at least a couple of hours. It was the perfect opening. Michael didn't even think twice. He had planned for this moment and wasn't about to let it slip away. That afternoon, with his pulse racing in anticipation, he snuck into Cherry's office like a thief in the night. The office was quiet, bathed in the dull glow of fluorescent lights. Michael carefully shut the door behind him and slipped the keycard into the lock, feeling the satisfying click as it opened. The office smelled like fresh leather and coffee, a faint, clean scent that seemed to make his heart beat faster. He stepped inside and quickly moved to the desk. The computer was left on, and he booted it up, knowing that this was his chance. The soft hum of the computer felt like a countdown. He started rifling through files, documents, anything that could give him the leverage he needed. Michael felt the adrenaline pumping through his veins as he scrolled through financial reports, private memos, and personnel files. It felt wrong, but in the moment, it didn't matter. The more he searched, the more certain he became that there was something that could be used against Cherry, something that would ruin him and elevate Michael in the process. Hours seemed to pass in a matter of minutes as Michael dug deeper, becoming more focused, more determined. He didn't hear the soft click of the door closing behind him. He didn't hear the quiet buzz of the surveillance system starting up. What Michael didn't know was that Cherry, having canceled his meeting at the last minute, was already in the building, monitoring his every move from a hidden security system. He had been aware of Michael's growing curiosity and the strange behavior he'd noticed over the past few weeks. Cherry had seen the signs, had been waiting for this exact moment. It wasn't just paranoia. It was experience. Cherry knew what it was like to be underestimated because of his race. He had learned long ago that people like Michael, white, entitled, hungry for power, would do whatever it took to push someone like him out of the way. But Cherry wasn't just going to let that happen. As Michael clicked through files, oblivious to the surveillance, he heard a voice. "What are you looking for, Michael?" It wasn't loud, but it was cold, cutting through the silence with an authority that made Michael freeze in place. His heart dropped into his stomach, and the blood drained from his face. He froze, not knowing what to do. His mind raced, but it felt like he couldn't catch up to the moment. He didn't know what to say, how to explain himself. He quickly turned, eyes wide with shock, and saw Cherry standing in the doorway. Cherry's gaze was piercing, his posture calm but powerful. His eyes didn't leave Michael for a second, reading him, studying him with a quiet intensity. In that moment, Michael realized how much he had underestimated his boss. Cherry wasn't just some corporate figurehead. He was far more capable, far more aware than Michael had ever given him credit for. The blood in Michael's veins ran cold. As Michael turned to face Cherry, it was like the entire world shifted beneath him. For the first time, he truly saw his boss. Not just the man in charge, but the person whose every action had been a lesson in resilience, in patience, and in quiet power. Cherry was standing there, calm and composed, his piercing eyes locked onto Michael with an intensity that seemed to reach right into his soul. For a brief moment, Michael felt as though everything he had believed about the business world, everything that had driven him, was evaporating before his eyes. In his mind, business had always been a game of power, manipulation, and using the right connections to climb higher, faster. There was no room for morality, no space for personal feelings. To Michael, it was all about winning, no matter the cost. He had convinced himself that what he was doing wasn't personal. It was just how things worked. But now, as he faced Cherry, all those beliefs began to unravel. Michael could no longer justify his actions. His carefully constructed worldview, the one that allowed him to sleep at night, to push forward in the corporate world without remorse, started to crumble in an instant. Cherry had seen through him all along, and the weight of that realization hit Michael harder than he could have ever anticipated. Cherry took a slow step toward the desk, his movements deliberate, controlled. There was no rush. He wasn't angry, not yet. But there was something deeper in his gaze, something that Michael had never noticed before. Cherry was no longer the boss, the person Michael had been trying to outmaneuver. He was a man who had seen the game Michael was playing, and in that moment, he wasn't just a part of it. He was above it. When Cherry sat down across from him, Michael felt the room close in. He could feel his pulse pounding in his ears, his throat tightening. He wanted to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Cherry didn't immediately speak, instead, letting the silence stretch between them, thick and suffocating. Then, finally, Cherry's voice cut through the tension, low, calm, but with an edge to it that Michael hadn't expected. "You thought I didn't notice?" Cherry's words hung in the air. They weren't accusatory, but they weren't forgiving either. "All these years, all your little attempts to find dirt on me? You thought I wouldn't see through your manipulation?" The weight of the words sank into Michael like a stone. For the first time, he understood the depth of his own mistake. All the small, quiet acts of betrayal, The emails he had sent, the sideways glances, the subtle manipulations had not gone unnoticed. Cherry had seen it all, and Michael had been too blinded by his own ambition to see that Cherry had been watching him, calculating, understanding exactly who Michael was and what he was trying to do. Michael's stomach twisted into knots, the acid of guilt rising in his throat. How had it come to this? How had he, someone who had always prided himself on being a player in the game, gotten so tangled in his own lies? The plan he had thought would elevate him, the careful plotting, the searching for leverage, now felt like a sick joke. He had been too focused on getting ahead to notice that the very thing he had been playing against was the thing that had been steady all along. Cherry wasn't just a victim of the system. He was the system's survivor, and Michael had failed to see that. Fear and shame crawled up his spine. Michael wanted to speak, to defend himself, but nothing came out. It was like his tongue had been tied, like he had no words left that could explain himself. All the justifications he had built up, the idea that Cherry's success was somehow unearned, that his own struggles were harder, that he deserved more, seemed suddenly hollow. They were empty excuses. The truth was that Michael had never considered the possibility that he wasn't entitled to success simply because of his skin color. He had never understood that, in a world built on systemic racism, Cherry had fought harder than anyone for the very things Michael took for granted. His inner conflict began to gnaw at him. Should he lie his way out of this? Would a smooth excuse or a pleading apology change anything? Could he beg for mercy, explain that it was just ambition, that it was all part of the game? The options seemed to swirl in his mind, each one more futile than the last. No matter what he said, the truth had already been laid bare. He had tried to destroy Cherry, to make himself feel powerful, and now he was trapped in his own web of deceit. For a long moment, Michael sat in silence, the weight of his own conscience pressing down on him, suffocating him. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in. Every choice he had made, every step he had taken toward this moment, seemed to echo in his mind like a series of mistakes he couldn't undo. He could feel his breath shallow, his heartbeat racing. There was no easy escape, no quick fix. Cherry was right, and Michael was left with nothing but the raw, uncomfortable truth. And then, Cherry leaned back in his chair, his gaze never wavering. "I'll let you decide what happens next, Michael. But know this, you've already lost the game." As the seconds ticked by, Michael realized the gravity of the situation. He had been so focused on destroying Cherry's career, so obsessed with proving that he deserved a promotion more than Cherry, that he hadn't considered what Cherry's response would be. The thought that Cherry might have anticipated his every move terrified him. Cherry wasn't just a boss. He was a man who had survived, even thrived, in an industry built on systemic racism, and he wasn't about to let someone like Michael destroy him so easily. Cherry leaned back in his chair, a small smirk on his face. "You should have known better, Michael. You think this is just about me, don't you? It's bigger than that. You've been part of the system all along. The system that lets people like you walk in and take what you want, all while I have to fight twice as hard just to be seen as your equal." The weight of Cherry's words hit Michael like a freight train. He had never thought about it this way. His whole life had been shaped by privilege. And now, sitting in the very office he had tried to destroy, he finally saw it. He wasn't just attacking Cherry. He was attacking everything Cherry represented. He was attacking the very notion of fairness, of equality. But before Michael could respond, Cherry cut him off. "Let me show you something." Cherry stood up and walked over to the filing cabinet, pulling out a folder. I've been keeping tabs on you too, Michael. I know everything about you. Every time you've sabotaged my meetings, every email you've sent to your buddies, every attempt to turn people against me. You really thought you could get away with this, huh? The air in the office was thick with tension as Michael stared at the folder in Cherry's hand. It was full of proof. Everything Michael had done to undermine him was laid out in black and white. For the first time, Michael realized just how far he'd gone, how deep the rot had sunk into his own moral compass. He felt ashamed, humiliated. Cherry continued, his voice low but firm. You're not just fighting me, Michael. You're fighting a system that has held me back my entire life. I've had to play by rules that were designed to make sure I never succeeded. But I'm still here. And you? You're about to learn what happens when someone like you tries to take advantage of someone like me. Michael could barely speak. All his excuses, all his justifications felt hollow now. He knew there was no way out, no easy escape. The trap had been set, and he had walked right into it. But as he sat there, watching Cherry slowly close the folder, Michael realized something else. For the first time in his life, he understood what real power meant. And it wasn't about privilege or manipulation. It was about resilience, about surviving when the odds were stacked against you. Cherry smiled, but it wasn't a cruel smile. Don't worry, Michael. This isn't over for you, but it's over for your little schemes. He turned and walked out of the office, leaving Michael to face the truth he had been running from all along.